Hello and welcome to today's Insight Live. I'm Jason Rader. I'll be your host as we talk about sustainability with our special guest, Pure Storage, today. With me, we've got some of the usual suspects. We have Juan Orlandini, who's our CTO in North America. Welcome, Juan.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Glad to have you, sir. And we have Elizabeth Rubin, who is a Senior Director and ESG Controller for Pure Storage. Welcome, Elizabeth. We're glad to have you.
Hi, thank you.
So, maybe a slight deviation from the kind of nerd talk we usually talk about, Juan. We're glad to be edified by Elizabeth in talking about sustainability today. And that's not to say that we don't care about this or talk about this on a regular basis, but I don't think we've had a show specifically on it before.
I don't
So,
think we have.
for,
And sorry, Jason. I was just
no,
going to
please.
say, I think it's a high time that we did, because I'll tell you from the
Perfect.
interactions that I have with our clients all over the country, and actually up in Canada as well, and my peers have in the rest of the world, this is super high on people's minds. And it's high from a just trying to be a good human to the planet perspective, but it's also high on the minds because there's regulatory requirements coming down the pipe, and there's a lot of other things that are becoming really important. And this is a complicated thing. So anything we can do to help, first and foremost, the planet and the future of our children, and then everything else we can do for our clients along the way. That's a fantastic topic anytime.
Absolutely. And I know our leadership is very concerned. We talk about this a lot in our own leadership meetings. And, but I think as we're talking about this, why don't we let Elizabeth, when we talk about sustainable IT, why don't you kind of tell our folks that are watching what we're talking about there?
Yeah, great. So thank you for having me on. And I think kind of building off of Juan's point is that say, yes, there's what we need to do for the environment. But at the heart of it is economics and business. And how do we solve what for the environment it needs using our economic and business capitalism hats? And they can live together. They don't have to be separate. And so when you're thinking about IT and sustainable IT in that space, you're thinking about developing hardware, data centers, networks, and software that requires less electricity, because of less electricity, less carbon emissions, and then produce less of that waste in terms of heat. You're thinking about renewable energy. So how are you powering your IT operations through renewable sources like solar, wind, hydropower? And you're thinking about the eco designs that optimizes performance, recyclability, this concept of circularity. How do we minimize the e-waste that's going in? We're thinking about our supply chain. We're thinking about green cloud. And a large part of sustainable IT includes the certification and the verification of our claims. It's no longer, fine to just say, hey, I'm green, I'm, carbon neutral, I'm net zero. Customers are really wanting us to prove it out. And we're going to talk about this later through regulation, as that's actually going to start peeling the onion to prove out these statements that we're making. So how can you start proving it out? There are certifications like EPEAT, the Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool. There's life cycle analyses that you can do that Pure Storage has done, aligned to the ISO 14040. You can become ISO certified in environmental management. These are new competencies for companies, but they're increasingly becoming important for just table stakes for getting deals won.
Love that. And, I think as, we talk a lot about AI and those kinds of things. And, one of the things that, as we were prepping for this conversation, I was just thinking about an incredible amount of processing required to do the AI, the generative AI things that we're doing right now. So I was just thinking, there's even a question of whether there's enough compute to even allow that to happen. So we're, anecdotally thinking about all of the heat and the other things that are generated by this is something we've definitely got to pay attention to with the way that we're embracing that new technology. And it kind of leads me to, my question, because when I think about the root of the problem that we're trying to get at with from a sustainability perspective, I'm thinking about, what part does IT kind of play in this? Is it meaningful? Is it one of those things? But it's huge, as we think about it, especially from that aspect. But also there's lots of other things that you brought up that I think a lot of people aren't necessarily kind of aligned with. I'd love you to kind of talk about, some positives and negatives, that IT can affect in that area.
Yeah, that's great. I think, Jason, when you really you zoom out and you just think about the data centers, right now it's 1 to 2% of the global energy consumption globally. And with AI and machine learning and just these advanced analytics, that's expected to significantly increase over time. I've seen estimates of 20, way, way high estimates as we start getting into this. It is as much as and growing faster than the airline industry, hands down. So the carbon and emissions that's coming out of the data centers is meaningful and growing and impactful. So how do we think about IT in solving that problem? And so when we're looking at kind of some of the positives that IT has enabled, right, is, hey, we've been able to enable, virtual collaboration through our cloud computing and our data centers, right? So less people on the road. Okay, got it. AI and analytics can also help us think about and optimize our systems. We have smart devices. So IT is helping, and in the data centers alone, what we're looking at for storage is significantly reducing the amount of energy consumed for just storage, and also from the compute side, I know they've made a lot of advancements as well. But to your point, the negatives is kind of going against us is that, and just like I was saying, there's just growing energy demand, and energy is not an unlimited resource. I think Europe has shown us that. China has shown us that. Businesses have shut down because of energy constraints, full stop. So it's not just a dollar aspect. It's not just doing the right thing for the globe, but there is constraints there that is constraining business. So even if you have a renewable data center, you want to optimize that. It's not free energy, even if it's coming from solar. You really want to get the best amount of performance out of every kilowatt hour that you consume. So that is important. And we also have to think about e-waste. Lead in our products and the e-waste of that is actually starting to truly impact these low socioeconomic communities where the e-waste goes. It is lead, as we all know, bad, lots of lead in tech products. And we need to be mindful about how that circularity of our products end up. So those are some of the negatives that we're really working on. But I think, hey, there's a lot of opportunity with any problem. I think there can certainly be solutions and business opportunity.
And Jason, when you say IT, that's such a broad term. Right. And I think your context was really data center, whether it's a cloud data center or a private hosted data center or colo, whatever it is. But there's excuse me, another aspect to it, which is the developers and even the consumers of those resources. And there's actually a way of helping that actually play into this as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually write code that is energy efficient. You can consume resources and services that are energy efficient when you make a choice to write a new product. And increasingly, we're starting to see that as being a choice when you do your development to choose to be green. It used to be as a developer. I started off as a developer a long, long time ago. Now I don't do that anymore. Back in the day, I always wanted the fastest and the most of everything. That's as a developer, that was my mentality, right? But now our developer and developer friends are starting to be a little bit more conscious and aware, hey, that there's a cost associated with fastest and most of everything. But B, there's also a socioeconomic impact to this and an environmental impact to this. So anything that we can do as part of that to provide that visibility and transparency to this is going to help in the long run.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you, Juan, and it might be, but I was the laziest coder out there. So, but that makes things inefficient, to a certain degree. So it's, being thoughtful and mindful of what you're working towards is really important, which I think is why initiatives like these, not just on the, the manufacturer side, but also in the full community that supports that's a really important aspect. So, and I applaud, Pure for having, this dialed in and having a message like this, because, a lot of folks, we work in industries like, I'm not going to call any out because they're clients, but, sometimes people do things because, well, the federal regulatory requirements or industry requirements are, mandate that those happen, or you're going to get a fine or those types of things. Being out in front of this because of good corporate citizens and world citizens is something that should be lauded as well.
Yeah, and I think the transparency to that, just like you were saying, Juan, like you can't really change what you can't measure. And I know that's an old adage, but to your point, if it's not visible and if it's not transparent, how do you even know it's there, and how do you even know what to do to change it? So one of the things that I'm working on at Pure is what's called impact accounting. So it's really taking the quantifiable e-waste, emissions, water usage, materials, right? We just talked about lead.
Hmm.
How much of that is within our product? How are we, emitting these things or consuming these things, and quantify that? And then you apply a monetary value coefficient to it, because once you add that monetary, just like cost accounting, we all understand money. We all, that lives our lives every day. And once you add a monetary valuation, it's not saying we're valuing the environment, but once you add that relative valuation, it becomes more clear. Okay, if should I trade off less emissions or the materials that I use? For every dollar that I spend in investment to improve our product from an environmental perspective, I now can have a relative understanding of the impact improvement that I can make towards my investments. And that's something that we're working on. It's very nascent. It's something our CEO is very interested in. But to that transparency point, making it transparent can drive better decision making, which then just improves our impact later.
One thing you said that really resonates, I think, with guys like Juan and I, is you talked about getting that data to be able to have those metrics. We love data. Data is irrefutable. It's one of those things. So the fact that when you collect that data, then we can interpret that, and then of course assign financial values to it as well. But I think it's brilliant when we have data that we can actually compare, because opinions are great, but data is way better.
Yeah.
So Jason, I'm gonna riff on that one and an earlier point that you made around AI and the volumes of data and compute that are required to support it. The compute side of the house is being addressed by the NVIDIAs and the Intels and AMDs, and they are working on making them more efficient, both in the production side of the house as well as in the consumption once they land in a data center or in a cloud. But the volumes of data are massive, all right, and those are not going to shrink. And in fact, it's probably going to grow and consume more, and those are not cheap to quantify or actually to operate. There are technologies, and Pure is one of the leaders in this space, that allow you to do, in essence, more with less and get more juice for the squeeze, right? So you put in higher performance, lower power consumption, denser, so you consume less power, less footprint, less air conditioning, less everything else, right? And still be able to drive these next generation technologies that do that. But you have to be mindful, and you have to be aware that you're doing this and consume them and put them in the right place. The good news is that it is an industry-wide effort that's happening. So there's a groundswell from the providers that are providing these toolings and amazing capabilities with an ESG mindset. And that should be part of the decision process that any of the listeners should take into, is when I'm buying the next generation of whatever it is that I'm refreshing, whether it's hardware or software or cloud or data center or edge or whatever it is, where does that fit in my ESG, and how well is that going to play into the future that I have for my plans?
I think that makes a lot of sense, Juan. And really, the success in this is not a silo off to the side. It's really slipstreaming ESG into just how you make decisions today. It's not, oh, this brand new thing. It's like, how do you just make better decisions today with different ideas and outcomes that you want? So there's performance, right? And then you're thinking about energy usage, and you're thinking about these things, right? When normally you never would have. You're like, actually, I'm going to expand my purview and actually think about these things more intentionally. And every step is a positive step, and it's not going to be perfect. And I think, Juan, you were saying as well earlier that, hey, it feels overwhelming, and it can, especially when we get to regulation. But it's these kind of small things that you can start integrating into your day-to-day decision making, whether it's your supplier selection, your product design, thinking about a new data center. Like, how do we just design with this new purview of options in mind on environmental aspects and social?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's the old adage of how do you eat an elephant? It's one
Yeah.
bite at a time, right? And because it can be overwhelming, right? If you start looking at scope one, scope two, scope three, and then you start branching out from all of the decision matrix and supplier chains that come from all of that, you could easily just get overwhelmed and not even know where to start. But you can start. It's actually pretty easy. And you can start from the data center, from the choices on storage, on compute, on networking, on the data center design, as you mentioned. But you can also do the same choice from the device side of the house, on the laptops, on the mobile phones, tablets that you're providing to your employees for their needs and all that. And so all of these are actually not hard. You just have to be mindful, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's a big part of this is be mindful. And I think it'll go a long, long way very quickly.
Mhm.
That's a great.
Exactly. Mhm.
Oh, I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was going to say that's a great segue into we did a survey, which we typically do before each session. And this one we had a lot of folks who you know voted in it. It was how important is sustainability to your organization's IT strategy? Very important, somewhat important, neutral, or not that important at all. You'll be happy to hear that zero people said not that important. 78% said very important. So and
Mm.
6% somewhat and 17% neutral. So close to 80% said that this is a very important part of their strategy. And I think, to both of your points, that they need the data, right? They need the information to make those decisions. And they need, Juan, like when we work with clients, if that's one of their considerations, we lay it out for them, all of the pieces and parts of the solution that's going into play, we can help them attain their sustainability goals as well as their performance and financial goals related to that as well. But it's got to be, again, that data's got to be part of the equation. That solution, that business outcome, we can bake that in.
Well, and it's fiscally responsible now to do that, right?
Mhm.
It's true. Nobody's going to argue that either. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's good for the planet and it's good for the way the ledger sheets in the organization. So I think that's a kind of a no-brainer in my opinion, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think we touched on it, but it's worthy to have a conversation about regulatory. I kind of mentioned earlier that some people do it when they're required to, when there's the worst ones have jail time associated. I don't see that happening, but there's financial penalties and those other things also affect regulatory requirements. How do you think that's going to affect folks in IT? What's some of the impending stuff, or how do you think that's going to affect their decision making?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I can kind of take that, and then Juan, hand it over to you. So a little bit about this ESG controller role. So I report into the CFO directly. The ESG controller is really taking a financial lens in preparation for regulation. So right now, a lot of the sustainability reports that you see, especially in the US, are voluntary, which means you can pick and choose what you report on. You have these frameworks, kind of optional, and you can decide. So it's not comparable. Definitely not comparable. In some cases, it's not complete. Some are cherry picking. And is it decision useful? And so when you have a lot of voluntary data that's driving the capital markets, who are now putting almost $20 trillion globally, assets under management, into ESG, and it's even growing up to possibly a third of the total assets under management. When you have all the capital markets making decisions on, incomplete, possibly not comparable, comprehensive data that's at the point voluntary, you're going to have regulation get involved just to stabilize the market because there's so much money going here. So regulation is table stakes to help keep up with what's already happening. So when you're thinking about regulation, which is really coming out of Europe, a lot of it, we just saw California come to the table last month. It's table stakes, and you got to get ahead of it. Don't wait for it to happen to you, because pretty soon, well, what I should say is that regulation is impacting the value chain, which is if you are a customer for anybody, you are part of their value chain, and your customers are going to be asking you for this information. And by the time they ask you, you're already behind the eight ball. So get ahead of this. Number one, understand your materialities, talk to your sustainability crew, because now, RFPs, they're going to increasingly include this, because I think, to your point, Jason, yes, there's legal time, probably a little bit on the outside, but you can also be thinking about, there's going to be penalties, and there's other issues that are going to come up. Companies are not going to want that risk, hands down. So how are they going to minimize it? They're going to want to work with suppliers that minimize their risk. So get ahead of it. And being in front of that will ensure that you can free up your time to focus on the business opportunity that's going to emerge as we start transitioning globally into a low carbon economy. We're already there with tons of EVs. You're starting to see more renewable, billions of dollars going into renewables. We are in the transition to a low carbon economy, and there's going to be people that win in this transition, and there's going to be those that are behind and don't. So, and again, it gets back to the data, but that's a little bit about the regulation, and then also how the capital markets are helping push this along.
Yeah, so I'll make one observation about regulation, and particularly here in the US, it's slow to catch up in general, right? Yeah. But when it does come, it is an overwhelming force. And if you're unaware of that is coming or unprepared for it, it will be overwhelming and materially impactful to the organizations. And you're exactly right, Elizabeth. Europe is leading the way. Germany is showcasing a lot of what you can do with this, and do it in a again, fiscally responsible way and meaningful way. So if you want to take a North Star for now to take a look at what you can do or should do, take a look at what the Europeans are doing, because we're going to land somewhere close to that sooner or later, right? So if you're interested to see and want to understand, great place to get started. And there's some amazing stuff that's happening on that side of the house. I have a peer of mine that does a lot of this work in EMEA. And man, are they doing some cool stuff. And clients are actually loving it because it's driving value for them. It's not a cost center. It's a value creation tool for them. And that's the right way to think about this.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Juan, that's totally right. And thinking about Europe, Pure Storage, we've started to engage with a group called the Value Balancing Alliance. They are a corporate membership who's helping influence the EU regulation. And so it's something where, hey, we're seeing it coming out of Europe. US is going to be. And so how do you get in front of it? How do you help influence it? Because regulators want to hear from us. We're the practitioners. We're really running this. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here if you lean in. And I think, to your point, Juan, is don't hide and wait for it to come. It's one of those things where you're like, lean into the discomfort, figure out those baby steps to go help you advance, because it's happening.
Yep. And it's not an if, it's a when, right? And you better be ready for that. So yeah, 100%.
No, I think, being a cybersecurity guy, as Insight CISO, things like CMMC affect, government contracts and those types of things from a cybersecurity perspective moving forward. That's the way they kind of control that. Do you foresee, though, if there's not a regulatory requirement to do these things, do you feel that there'll be like incentives in certain, ISO 27001's the security side, the ISO 14040 would be that, like, and you mentioned RFPs earlier, do you think they'll get to a point where selection will be down to having these required elements? It sounds like EMEA is leaning that way. AP typically follows EMEA pretty close. Maybe the US will do it on a federal side. What's your gut on that?
So I'll give you my from the field perspective. Is we already are starting to see that as part of the RFIs, RFQs, RFP processes, is that there are requests for sustainability stances for both Insight as the respondent, plus also all of the componentry that's included in that response. All right, whether it's hardware, software, services, whatever it is. And in case anybody wants to know, we do have a sustainability report. It's on our website. Happy to send you a link to that. But you should be looking for that for your suppliers and your providers to make sure that they're doing these things right and getting ahead of the game. Because you're right, Jason. It is going to be, I think, a little bit of regulation, a little bit of energy from the community, a little bit of all of those things that's going to drive this thing. But like back to the previous point, it's going to happen. 100% is going to happen. So just go into it.
We've had a good conversation, but I think there's a thing that we'd like to wrap up with. And it's, because we've talked about a lot of stuff, and our average listener, I think they like the gold nuggets that we throw out at the end of where do they get started? Where's a good place to start? Because, a lot of it, they don't necessarily need to go out and start reading, the ISO standards. What's a good place, somebody who's in an organization like your own, Elizabeth, that's mature and has this kind of defined and is working to continue to mature. What do you suggest to organizations that are out there on where they get started? And Juan, I'll let you finish with that as well.
Great. Yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Juan. So for us, it's really taking a step back and simplifying. It feels overwhelming, but at the core of it, even when we look at all the regulation, you can make it very simple in the sense of looking at your materiality assessment. What are the big material, environmental, and social issues for your company? Leave it to 5, just 5, just 3, just keep it simple. Now, take a step back and say, okay, once you look at that, think about your business. So think about your operations, think about your supply chain, think about the impacts your product makes, and say, how do these impact, these material assessments? So we did a life cycle analysis for our products, which is an awesome way to go out and figure out, okay, where are we making environmental impact? Then you can start collecting data, slipstreaming it into your business. But get started, number one. And number 2 is, start thinking about it very programmatically, like you would for a business. Slipstream it into what you're already doing, and just start moving and collecting data, because it's going to be a lot about the data. But Juan, what are your thoughts?
So I agree with everything that you said, 100%. But I'd like to give starting points for that starting conversation. So 3 of them. One of them is in the data center, where we talked about, and Pure plays very strongly in that. And it could be as simple as how do you make sure that your storage subsystems are efficient and sustainable, all that other good stuff. Take a look at that side of the house. That's a relatively low-hanging fruit. The other one that's part of the new normal is this return to work. And there's been a lot of debate as to whether or not we should have mandates to return to work. And I'm going to steal a line from Chuck Robbins, the CEO from Cisco. He said the office shouldn't be a mandate, should be a magnet. All right. Part of the magnet of creating the office that people want to work in is to do things like, I don't know if you can tell, but behind Jason, there's a bunch of greenery, and part of what we've done in our world headquarters is make it an attractive place that's sustainable, right? That really wants to bring our teammates back to the office and collaborate and work and all those other things. So if you're pondering what you're going to do with your real estate and your return to work environment, take a look at what you're doing on that side of the house, because there's some amazing technologies out there that do make that place more attractive and also more sustainable. Everything from air conditioning to power to collaboration, all of those things. And then the final piece is on the device side of the house. Take a look at what your device strategy is, because I'd be willing to bet you that you can make a much better decision on the devices that you're providing to your end users to give them a better work experience, number one, but also make those devices sustainable as well. And those are relatively easy lifts, all 3 of those, if you really just lean in and start there.
But both fantastic. I think, I love, Elizabeth, what you said, start to collect some data. I think it starts somewhere, collect that data, measures great. And I think you had mentioned earlier, if there's a way to do this, become more fiscally responsible, more efficient. So you can do all of those things if you just kind of pay attention to that full life cycle. So I think don't miss an opportunity when you're doing those other business aspects. I say that a lot about security as well. Hey, if we're going to look at this process to try to make it more efficient, or see where to put AI in it, or those kinds of things, let's also see where we can put sustainability in it, or security in these things. So I think that's what a lot of people are having to look at today. And I'm saying, whenever you're doing that exercise, try to gain that efficiency of doing all of the things at the same time. Just paying attention typically gets you 30% better in most cases, just by paying attention to those things. So
great. Hey, Jason,
I'm
going to give one more nugget, if you don't mind.
Bring it on, man.
So if you are not including ESG in your RFIs and RFQs, you might not be making them part of your decision matrix, but do include the ESG as part of your process. So you can start collecting the data, so that when it does become a decision point, you have a history and an understanding, and you're also asking your providers to start behaving in the right way if you're not mandating them yet. And that might be a good start as well.
Totally right. And at a certain point, you'll be held accountable for those decisions you make. So keeping track of that now is a good thing as well.
Yep.
It's been a cool conversation, guys. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, thanks for your support here on this, and thanks for Pure Storage and all that you guys do with us as a partner. We appreciate that. And Juan, as always, thanks for your extra nuggets that you throw in there. If you want to know more about what we do, please visit us at insight.com, solutions.insight.com, and visit Pure Storage's website as well and check out what they've got. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for all you guys who filled out those surveys and for your comments. We appreciate them. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Insight Live.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.